Hi guys, welcome back. Behavior Strategies for Class. This is the podcast that is turning student behavior challenges into classroom success stories by helping teachers respond to challenging behavior with calm, clarity, and confidence so that every student can thrive. So if that is what you are looking for, you are in the right place for sure. And so I have finished the school year. Yes, thank you, Jesus. I am on summer break. I am so excited. But this episode is about looking back at the school year. We'll be talking about breakthroughs that reminded us why we teach, the stumbles that stretched us, moments that shaped our students in big and small ways, and reminded us of the impact that we make and have made through the year. So settle in, guys. You won't want to miss this. Welcome to Behavior Strategies for Class, the show where your student behavior challenges become your classroom success stories. I'm Diane Bachman, a trauma-informed educator, a certified trauma-informed coach with over 15 years of experience working in special education. And I help teachers respond to behavior with calm, clarity, and confidence while building real connection. Each week, we're going to break down those tough moments with practical trauma-informed strategies you can use right away. You'll hear stories that remind you you're not alone. And if you're ready for a calmer classroom, stronger relationships, and behavior support that actually works, you're in the right place. Let's get started. So before we get started, as always, hit that subscribe button, share this podcast, this episode with other educators that you know, so we can continue to learn and grow together. So we're going to be talking about reflection, tips, stories, lessons learned. It's definitely been another exhausting, challenging year working with students in our behavior program. And if you're new to my channel, I have been working in special education for almost 20 years with students with all kinds of disabilities. And now I work in a behavior program with students who have had some sort of trauma or still maybe going through some trauma, and that affects their ability to stay in the classroom and focus and learn and do their best. So we come in and help teach some behavior strategies so that they can be in the room, be in their classroom, learning and doing their best without having their emotional and behavior interrupt that learning for them. And so I really love being on this side of special education and helping these kiddos because they are such a challenge, right? I have been like spit on, have my hair pulled, called all kinds of lovely, cuss words and names, and kicked and hit and slapped and all the fun things. And I always show up the next day for the most part. There are some times that I do take a mental health day, but for the most part, I love what I do. I love working with students. And so some of the wins that we have had this year in our program is just the growth of our team and being able to kind of read each other a little bit better, to know when we need to step in when they're working with a student, when we need to step away at times when we're working with a student. We've kind of learned a little bit more about each other and what our kind of I wouldn't say our triggers per se, but when we know, I may lose it, so I need to step away. So that, of course, is always helpful, right? To be able to lean on and learn from each other as we help our students. Some of the wins, too, is having students tell us, you don't have to be in here with me anymore. You can leave, and sometimes I mean, of course, this is what we want, right? We want them to feel confident and be able to be in the classroom where they don't have as much support from us. But sometimes when they tell us that, they're over in the corner playing when they should be sitting and listening to the teacher. So sometimes it's like, I'll leave, when I can see that you're doing your work or doing what you need to be doing. And then it's usually a couple minutes and then they don't even notice. And, I'm able to leave and go and check on other students. So that's always a win because that is our end goal, really, is to give them their independence, right? So that and the skills and the strategies so that when they are in, a place where they're feeling emotional overload and their behavior is about to, explode, then they can learn like, oh, wait, I can do this instead, or I can do this, or whatever it is, so that they can be in class and access their learning 100%. So it's great when they do tell us, you know what, I'm good. It's like, all right, I got you, fine. And so it's great also to come back, check on that student and see that they are engaged in their learning and doing what they should be doing. Other times, students are not. And we had a runner this year. When he would get upset, man, he was booking it. And of course, he's super fast. And I would call for backup, of course. And thankfully, they were much faster than me and were able to catch him and stop him from getting way too far away from the school. So definitely learned I never wear sandals to school, no matter what the weather is. Always have shoes that I can run in. So those are always key to when I am working with students in our program. Other times it's great to see students learn that, you know what, I need a break. I just need a break right now. Okay, let's go take one. Other times it's learning or teaching them to advocate for themselves, right? So then they can go ask your teacher and make sure that this is a good time for you to take that break. And then they have to learn how to accept that no, right? Because sometimes you as the teacher, you're in the middle of the lesson that they need to know in order to do this writing project or writing paper. And so that's not a good time. And sometimes our students have been okay with that. Other times, not so much. And they walk out of the classroom anyway. So we have to go back, make sure they're safe, of course, reteach. What is it you should be doing? Is this a safe choice? What else could you do? Can you wait 10 minutes? Can you wait 5 minutes? I mean, sometimes really it is just 5 minutes to wait. And we know sometimes 5 minutes seems like forever for students. But getting them to a point where they're like, all right, I can wait. I can go back to my desk and work on whatever it was I was working on until the teacher said this is a good time now. You can go. So building that self-advocacy has been really great to see the growth in that. A lot of our students definitely use that and have learned to advocate for themselves. And learning how to handle no is definitely a challenge that, of course, probably a majority of us don't like to hear, right? No. But that is in our everyday language. That is something that they are going to have to deal with like for the rest of their life, no matter what they're doing, that there's boundaries in whatever it is they're doing. They can't just go and do, I'm just going to go draw. And that is another thing, like seeing our students, especially one of our kiddos, he'd get a writing assignment and he'd be coloring instead. It's like, those were not your directions, but I want to color. Okay, I understand, but those were not your directions. But I understand, but those are not your directions. So just reminding them, again, holding them to the expectation, which I will talk about a little bit more too. Reminding them, like, buddy, you're in school. Your job is to follow the directions of the teacher and do what you need to do. When it's free time, obviously you can do whatever you want. But right now, this is what we're doing. So that has, still been a pushback, right? Because they like, obviously, doing whatever they want, right? Who doesn't like doing that? But when we're in school, and that is something that I have used a lot. Okay, but you're in school now, and when you're at school, this is what needs to happen. This is the expectation. This is, on the schedule and whatever we're doing, right? So just reminding them, like, okay, well, at home, obviously you can do whatever you want according to mom and dad, whoever the guardians are, but when you're at school, this is what needs to happen. So that is definitely a constant reminder, and they don't obviously like to hear that, but it has worked really well in reminding them, things are different when you're at school. So some lessons learned, like, I definitely am a pretty patient person, but I have lost my patience with a couple kiddos. And I obviously don't like doing that. And when I lose patience, that means I am very short talking to the students. I sometimes will raise my voice. I don't really yell unless, of course, they're running in the street. And I have done that because our student is running in the street. Not fun. And then, of course, well, you yelled at me. Well, you're right, buddy, because you were out running and being unsafe. I don't want you to get hurt. But other times, when I did lose my patience, I think for me, that's really realizing, okay, this is where I need to step away, even just for a minute, advocating for myself and just saying, hey, I need to take a minute. I'll come back and we'll address whatever it is, if I can, right? Because depending on where that student is at that time, like he may be escalated and he's in the hallway, I can't just get up and walk away and be like, hey, I need a minute. That's not going to work. But usually, I can always call somebody and just say, hey, can I get support? And then we can tag out with each other. So I have to learn, like, okay, I am feeling like I'm getting close right here. So I can call for support. And usually pretty quickly, we're able to get support, and I can always walk away if I need to for a few minutes or a minute even just to go get some water. That makes a difference if you're able to do that, right? And then there's sometimes when there is no support. Like there were times we would have multiple people out on our team and there's nobody else to call per se. Sometimes we did have other support from other staff in the building, and they were always amazing when they could come and help. But, sometimes it just didn't work out, right? Everybody else is doing their own thing. They're, their groups, they're teaching, they're in specials, So it's hard sometimes, obviously, when you don't have support. And I know I've worked for some teachers who say, like, they've never had any support with their students with special needs. And I'd be like, wow, I don't know how you teachers do it when you don't have other support, because, those students do need extra help and support when they're in the classroom. Because, as I said, they don't always stay in the classroom. I remember when I worked at a previous school, we had one student, he was in the foster care system, and he was just struggling being in the classroom, and just so emotional, and, just be crying and wailing, and he'd be under the desk in the classroom, and we would finally be able to get him out of the classroom, but then he'd stop and fall, laying down or on his knees in the hallway. And it was just the saddest, heartbreaking cry and wail, because he was just so overwhelmed by whatever was happening. He had moved to another foster home, and now he's in a new school, and he was just so emotional. And so we were able to finally, once he would calm down a little bit, to be like, hey, let's go to the counselor's office, or let's go out, to, this principal's office, wherever it was, to just get him out of the hallway, because of course that wailing and that crying is like echoing in the hall, which of course is disturbing all of the classrooms. But when a student is that escalated and that emotional, like, you can't talk to them in the middle of that, right? They're not hearing you, even though you're trying to tell them, like, you're okay, you're safe right now, let's go here, we can get a snack, whatever it is, they're not going to hear you. So we had to wait until there was some type of little break in between, and he could hear us in order to move him out of, the hallway. We've had other students, man, they're like banging their heads on the wall in the hallway, in the classrooms, crying. We had one student, man, again, this wailing, crying, and he was banging his head. And finally, when he was able to calm down, he was so worried about his mom, because I think it was the boyfriend, was abusive, and he didn't know if his mom was safe. And so we were finally like, hey, let's see if we can call your mom so you can talk to her. And man, that just made all the difference in the world to him. Once he talked to his mom and she was okay, then he was okay to come to class. So just remembering that sometimes, and these are pretty, obviously severe cases, of kids, like I said, who have trauma, like they're going through, like right there. I had another student, the mom's boyfriend, these lovely boyfriends, was like dragging her mom down their driveway. And she was the older of like 3 siblings, and she's trying to get her sister and brother, away, and watching their mom, and like, and this poor girl would come to, like, she's totally depressed and not really doing any of her work. And it's just so heartbreaking. And I know as teachers, like, you don't always know, like, what's happening, right? You just see the behavior, that they're not paying attention, they're not focusing, they're not doing any of their work. And so that's why I love being in this program, being able to talk with the teacher and just say, hey, like, we'll take them out, and, we'll work with them on whatever the assignments that they're missing as much as possible when we can. And helping fill in some information, that you, like I said, as the teacher, don't always get. But when we're working with them and they're in the program, we have a little bit more information sometimes, that we can share and let you know, like, hey, this is going on, just so you know. And so it helps you get perspective and maybe, some more empathy, but also letting them know, like, hey, we want you to succeed as a student and still learn. And it's hard. It's hard for these students. And I know it's hard for you, because how do you get to them, right? And it's just showing them that you care. Like, that is one of the biggest lessons, is just showing them that you care. And I do that with all the students that I work with, and with all the students, really in all the classrooms that I'm in, to be able to encourage and care for them as much as I can as well. So a couple reflections is, honestly, students with challenging behavior are exhausting. If you don't know that already, right? Like, they are so exhausting, like physically, emotionally, they're exhausting, because you're always on, right? We are always on, trying to make sure everybody's safe, trying to process through all kinds of things, trying to talk with them, buddy, like, you can't sit in the hall the whole day. Well, but I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. Or I'm tired. I get it. They're just exhausting, right? Because you have to be that strength. You have to be that guidance. You have to be that support to help lift them up so that they can be in class and learning and doing their best. So, always make a space for you to decompress. And I usually would do that with a coworker. We have worked together almost 15 years. And so we are able to decompress together and just, like, say, hey, did you hear what this kiddo said? Or can you believe this kid did this? Or I'm exhausted. Can we switch? Students, sometimes we would switch students around because we needed a break working with specific students. And so that was always very helpful too, as well. And like I said, having those coworkers to decompress with, right? Because they're in it with you. And so I can come home and I can tell my husband all these crazy stories, and he's just like, I can't believe you work there. And he just doesn't get it. Whereas your coworker, they're in there with you. And so being able to decompress, by texting, just talking, going out for some soda after work, whatever it is, to be able to have that decompress. And sometimes it's just coming home and just like laying on my bed. It's like, nobody bother me, nobody talk to me, let me just chill for a minute. That has always been a nice decompression for me. So definitely having space to decompress is super helpful when you're working with students with challenging behaviors, because like I said, they are exhausting. So some tips that I have learned that our success is consistency. Sticking with that schedule, sticking with that routine, the communication with your students is really key. We communicate with our students all the time, as much as possible, especially when one of us is out. We usually let that student know, like, hey, Mr. Smith isn't going to be here today. So just so you know, you're going to be in class alone for a little bit, but, we know you can do it, just let the teacher know if you need anything. And usually the kids do really well knowing what to expect. So keeping that open communication is key, I think, to the consistency, to them knowing what is expected. And that leads into holding that expectation. So definitely throughout the year, kids, they don't want to do their work, right? Or they're out for a while and now they have work, that they need to make up. But of course they don't want to do it. And so we always held that expectation that this work needs to be done before X, Y, and Z. And, well, I'm not going to do it. Okay, well, we'll sit here until you do because it needs to get done before X, Y, and Z. This is, what the teacher gave us. This is what you're supposed to get done. And it needs to be done. Well, I'm not going to do it. Okay. So usually we just wait them out. I mean, we're able to do that. Right? You as the teacher in class, I don't think you really have that ability at times. So we're able to just wait them out. And usually for the most part, it gets done. I wouldn't say right away because they don't really jump on it. But I had one student who would always be like, fine, I'll do it. Great. Let's get it done. And then you can go on with your day. Or one of our students did not like going to specials at all. I don't know why. It was like music and PE, like the fun specials. But he just did not like it. And it's like, well, sorry, like this is where your class is going. That's where you need to be. That's the expectation. And he would finally get to the point where, fine, I'll go. And of course he went. And he really was fine when he got there. But just getting past that and holding to that expectation. Because of course, some of the time, like you don't want the battle, right? You're exhausted. You're done fighting this child. And you don't want to battle again. But if we give in one time, they're going to want to give in again and again and again. And it just doesn't work. So unless it's like the last day of school, then he didn't have to go. But anyways, otherwise, like we held the expectation, like this is what needs to be done, or this is where you need to be. This is where you're going to go. And eventually you're going to get there, whether you like it or not. And usually they would. They would get there. And sometimes they would get there like near the end of the class. Like, well, my class is going, yeah, but your expectation was to go over here. So you're still going to go in there. Holding to that expectation, because that's also building trust. As much as they don't like that we hold and stick to our word, we are building trust because we follow through on what we say. And students are so smart, right? They know when we're like bluffing them. When we're telling them, yeah, well, you're not going to be able to do this or this and this. And they're like, yeah, okay. Because we don't follow through. So holding to that expectation, following through is super important. And it still holds true after all these years of working in special education, working with students. Consistency, holding those expectations is super important. Sharing stories with the students. It's always fun. They always light up when they see and they hear like, wait, you didn't like this as a student? They just love to hear like math was not my thing in school. And so I'm always like, anything higher than fourth grade math, like I'm calling somebody else for the most part. Because if I'm not in class with that student when, the teacher is teaching it, because you do it differently than when I was in school. Just saying. But sharing, what did you enjoy being in school? What was your favorite thing to do at recess? Just those little ways. Students love to hear those stories. And it's always great to share them and just kind of build that connection with them. And another way, getting to know our students is just asking questions. And then of course we had one student, well, I don't want to tell you that. Okay. So we'd move on to something else. And it's like, well, why are you asking me so many questions? And then we're like, we're just trying to get to know you, buddy. Like near the beginning of school or maybe after spring break. Like, what did they do? Just different things. But because we want to give them opportunity to share as well, right? And laughing together. Like, I enjoy all of my students. We had a lot of fun together. They crack me up. So some of my funny stories are when I've been giving hugs. And I know this is not everybody's favorite, but I believe every student needs a hug. And it's a side hug, except little kinders. I'll give, front little grabs, hugs. But a couple of my students one time, one of them told me this year was I ruined hugs for everybody else because I squeezed too hard. So he wouldn't let anybody else give him a hug because I ruined it for them. I'm like, okay. And then I had another student tell me, like, after I gave him a hug, he's like, that was completely unnecessary. I'm like, dude, hugs are always necessary. They just crack me up. They were so much fun. Exhausting, like I said, but a lot of fun. So, wins, growing as a team, self-advocacy in our students, right? Watching that growth, wanting to be more independent, learning like I have a tipping point. I have a point where like I'm gonna lose my patience. Being able to know like it's okay if I'm able to take a minute, step away. And then also making space, right? To decompress. Maybe you do it just by reading. I do love to read, but I don't always do that to decompress. Sometimes it's just music, listening to music just on the way home from work also works. Whatever you can do to decompress was super important. And then those tips, right? That consistency, that holding expectations, sharing stories, asking questions, laughing together, and of course, giving side hugs. So, what are some reflections that you have from this year? For those who are already out, I know some school districts are not out yet. You have a couple more weeks. But what are some things that you're kind of already reflecting on? Or maybe lessons learned, like, what worked in your classroom this year and what didn't? What are you going to change for next year? And maybe, honestly, you're probably not even thinking of next year, and that's okay. I'm just saying for this past year, what have you learned most? What has influenced you the most this year? What is something funny that you remember one of your students told you? I would love to hear that. So leave a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening. You can always email me, Diane at behaviorstrategiesforclass.com. I would love to hear some of your comments and lessons learned. And guys, you're amazing. You are making a huge impact on your students. and you have made a big impact on your students. So I will see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. I truly appreciate your support. And if I have encouraged you, motivated you to continue to learn, to support your students, even better, to help them strive in your classroom, please leave a review, hit that subscribe button so that others can see they can learn and grow here as well. Thank you.